Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Yep, your continued support is very, very much appreciated and certainly not taken for granted. Apologies that there wasn't a show last weekend. I guess it was a case of life getting in the way of art at the end of the day. But anyway, I'm back. And I think I'm back with a bit of a bang. This is an episode I probably should have done last year in actual fact, but for one reason or another just never managed to sort of like shoehorn it in, and then obviously I redecorated the study and the samples, certainly the 14s, got shoved in a box and I couldn't find them, and just literally, it was actually last weekend when I had the opportunity to just do a bit of box digging and set up a few episodes of the show for the future, and I managed to find them. So as you can see, I'm looking at the last two releases of the mighty Octomore, the beast, the behemoth, the peat monster, and so on and so forth. But you know, is it really? You know, I know a lot of people kind of look at the sort of like the parts per million, and probably a lot of people, even though they like peated mods, are kind of put off by the amount of peat that's used in the process, and they're probably, you know, and so the question is it really sort of a one-dimensional peat monster? Well, hopefully today's episode of the show will find that one out. So firstly, a big thank you to Sarah at Remy Contro for the samples for today's episode of the show. Obviously, without the support of distilleries and distributors and so on and so forth, again, there wouldn't be an episode of the show. So very, very much appreciated. And well, hopefully I don't do a bad job of reviewing them. So I'm not really going to go into a huge amount of detail because, you know, Octomore, I've got 6 car strength samples. I mean, basically, the interesting thing is that sort of obviously when Octomore was first distilled, I mean, it was the, you know, back in what, 2002, somewhere around about that time, and it was the sort of the time when Jim McEwen and Mark Rainier were having the sort of like the what if conversations. And although the spirit is now peated to a huge parts per million, back in the day when they first started, it wasn't actually quite so heavily peated. I mean, I think the initial spirit that they produced was peated to about 80 parts per million, which even then was considered fairly high. But now we're up into the sort of 200s, and you just kind of like go, that's high. I mean, as we know, you know, Octomore has kind of skewed the whole concept of what heavy peat actually means. You know, Ardbeg, Lefroy, 50 parts per million, which was considered to be heavily peated. Port Charlotte as well, you know, high 40s. It's now considered sort of like, well, lightweight really, isn't it, at the end of the day? But anyway, so and of course another thing to bear in mind, of course, is that when we talk about parts per million of peat, that is the parts per million of peat in the malted barley. Of course, by the time you've actually run it through the stills and all that kind of stuff, you can pretty much say you've lost about 50% of that parts per million. So again, Ardbeg 50 parts per million, finished spirit round about 20 odd parts per million. Octomore, well, you know, it's still pretty hefty on the peat. And anyway, but is it too peated? Is it sort of like one-dimensional? And should you be afraid of it? Well, let's have a look. Okay, so like I said, we're going to look at the last two releases. The Octomore 15s are the current releases, and the 14s were obviously sort of not last year, the year before's release, 2023's release. So and as is their wont at the moment, they seem to do 3 releases per series. The first release, 0.1, so 14.1, appears to be the kind of like the benchmark, I suppose, because it's the wholly American oak aged. Although the thing is, you can't really call it a benchmark per se, because at the end of the day, all of these have got different peating levels. So, but the whole point is that X.1 is always 100% American oak age, or generally speaking 100% American oak age. So the 14.1 is, like I said, first fill ex bourbon, 5 years old. This one was peated to, or the barley was peated to 128.9 parts per million, distilled in 2017, bottled in July of 2023 at 5 years old, which appears to be the sort of like the chosen age statement for Octomore. And I suppose it kind of like, it's just nicely on the kind of cusp of youth, so you have all that youthful intensity, but hopefully without any of the faintiness. This one is 59.6%. My water butt is full to overflowing, it has to be said. Well, it's not full to overflowing, but it's pretty damn full. I mean, we're going to get through a bit of water, it has to be said. And I'm probably going to need to lie down after this in a darkened room. Anyway, so bottling number 2 is the 14.2, again 5 years old. Slightly less peating on this one by 0.9. It's actually 128 parts per million. A bottle of 57.7. Now, this is where I like what the distillery does in essence. Lots of different sort of like playing around with cask types. Sometimes it's finishing, sometimes it's vatting, and obviously each of them is created for what's going on in Adam's head, I imagine, at the time. So this particular one, the spirit spent 4 years in ex-Oloroso cask, so 40% of the spirit was ex-Oloroso, and then vatted into that was 16% first fill Amarone, and 44% second fill Amarone. That was all vatted together, and it then spent a further 1 year in ex-Pauillac wine casks. So quite wine influenced. I like wine and peat. They do tend to seem to work quite nicely together, so we'll see how that one pans out. Okay, bottling number 3 is obviously 14.3. This was peated to 214.2 parts per million, and it's a straightforward vatting, 50% ex first fill bourbon and 50% second fill wine casks. Again, just 5 years old, 61.4%. Oh, I'm going to torture my liver for you guys. Anyway, then we're moving on to the 15s. So 15.1, again, it's American oak age, so first fill bourbon and recharred bourbon. This is a fairly lightweight in actual fact. It's only peated to 108.2 parts per million. It was distilled in 2018, bottled last year, 59.1%. So again, that's, I did think whether I should do the two sort of, the two ones and then sort of go on, but I thought actually no, I think it makes more logical sense to do the 14s, then we'll look at the 15s. Hopefully my palate will be okay by the time we get to that point. Anyway, number 2, 15.2 is again peated to the same level, 108.2%, and I mean, I don't know whether that was done by design or whether that was just circumstance, but it would make sense to keep the peating level more or less the same if you want to explore how cask influence affects the spirit. But anyway, this was aged in second fill wine cask, second fill ex-bourbon, and then vatted together and re-racked into first fill cognac. Again, 5 years old, bottled at 57.9%. And 15.3, the last one, I often say, oh, I like to finish on a bit of peat. Well, I'm finishing on a bit of peat, and I'm finishing on a bit of monstrous peat. I mean, this is, I believe, the heaviest peated Octomore spirit at 307.5. Now, yeah, brilliant, understand that, but like I said, you've got these two bottlings at 108, and then suddenly 300 parts. It doesn't really kind of make a great deal of sense if you're looking at them as a trio, but obviously there must be some kind of logic working there somewhere. It's just obviously I can't figure that one out. Anyway, so this is a fairly straightforward, again, I don't know if it's 50-50, but it's a combination of first fill bourbon and first fill Oloroso hogshead from Fernando de Castilla. Again, 5 years old, 61.3%. So nothing like finishing with a bit of a bit of a bang. Anyway, let's just make a start on the 14.1. Shall we? So the benchmark for the 14s. This is indeed 100% American oak. Let's see what the nose gives on this end, shall we? It's actually quite reserved. And it's not, you know, you kind of like think 128 parts per million, I'm thinking sort of screaming peat, but it's not actually. It's, by Octomore standards, I have smelt more strong peated aromas. It's got that lovely peatiness, smoky bacon, earth, a little bit of tar, some barbecued notes, bit of meat, wet tar, but again, it's beautifully balanced, and you can get beneath all of that, there's some barley notes, there's some malt, it's got a lovely rounded character, there's a little medicinal note just creeping in, but not too much. There's a slight soapiness on the spirit, and there's a little bit of Turkish delight as well, just to basically say, you know, this is a 5-year-old spirit. Now, I'm not getting bent out of shape about that. In actual fact, you could almost say, well, it kind of really just adds to the sort of like the complexity of the aromas. And it's definitely not one-dimensional. This is one of the things that's always amazed me about Bruichladdich, about peated Bruichladdich, is the fact that it does seem to retain the character of the spirit, even under a fair amount of peat. Let's see what that's like. Again, it's all very, I'm not going to quite say polite, but it's very reserved. It's not screaming Octomore peat at me. I will give it that it does kind of build quite nicely. The peat starts off relatively modestly and does kind of build throughout. So there's a little bit more intensity on the finish. Again, smoked barbecued meat, earth, green pepper, a little bit medicinal note. Touch of barley, a little bit more kind of one-dimensional, it has to be said. It's just a bit polite, really, at the end of the day, and that's, I mean, it's not denigrating the spirit, but it's kind of like, you know, when you talk Octomore, when you talk big peat, you expect it to kind of come in with an intensity, and this kind of meanders in a little bit, you know, it's kind of, you know, Octomore light almost. I mean, the quality of the spirit is lovely, but it's just kind of like, you know, it's, the perception is that it should just be a little bit more intense. Anyway, let's see what a little water does to it. Now that's kind of really sort of dissipated all the peat, and that, I mean, yes, all right, it's brought out the oiliness of the spirit, but it's kind of like sort of, what's the point of Octomore? The point of Octomore is the peat, and then you put a little drop of water with it and the peat just flies away, and it's kind of like, well, that's really quite disappointing. I mean, it's got some lovely barley notes, there's a little bit of sweetness coming out now, but, you know, and bar a bit of sort of smoky bacon there, it's kind of like almost peatless. Let's see what the pass like now. Right, it has retained some peat on the palate. Again, it's got more that green pepper capsicum kind of character, a little bit of earth, still sort of barbecuey, but it's kind of, it's not so meaty, it's not so full and fat and round, it's kind of like a little bit more coastal. There's some salt coming through now. Didn't really get an awful lot of that on the nose or the palate when it was neat, it has to be said. So yeah, okay, it's brought out maybe a little bit more sort of, you know, elegance, a little bit more coastal influence, I suppose, but it just kind of comes across again as a little bit too polite for my liking anyway. So okay, interesting start, I suppose. Okay, so let's move on to the 14.2. So Oloroso and First Fill American Oak, Amarone, and then Pauillac Cask finishing. So let's see what nose we do. Now that is a lovely nose, that's really nice. Again, okay, you can argue that it's not thumping me in the face with peat. There's a little bit more sort of syrupy red fruits, there's some berries, red currants. nice medicinal edge to the peat. Again, green pepper, stewed apple, currants, menthol, camphor. That just has a little bit more going on, and yeah, okay, there's a sort of, again, a bit of a politeness happening here. It's not, you know, wading in with sort of like, you know, huge gobs of peat, but it's got a lovely complexity, and it's got more complexity, I think, than the previous bottling, point one, and that's, you know, in a different manner. I mean, where the sort of like the batch one probably had more sort of barley and maybe more spirit character, this doesn't quite have that, but where it's losing that, it's kind of making up for it with the sort of the winey notes, a little bit of dried fruit, not too much sherry, possibly a little more wine, but I really like this. I think this is a lovely nose. Let's see what it tastes like. Now that tastes like there's more peat going on here, even though it's only peated to the same kind of level, and it's kind of feels like it's being amplified by the wininess. I'm getting that kind of like almost kind of mousari, kind of volatile sort of animal-y note coming through, red currants, berries, earth, peat, astringent coastal notes, really salty, really astringent on the finish. That's intense. That's what I want from Octomore. Okay, it's still not kind of bludgeoning me over the head with peat, and maybe I'm expecting too much here. Maybe even though it's peated to 128 parts per million, maybe that's not enough. Maybe it needs more, you know. I mean, I have tasted peatier Octomores, it has to be said, but I love that. I think it's got a beautiful complexity, good progression, and like I said, I like the way that sort of animally volatile mousari kind of like note kind of creeps in and just intermingles and works with the peat, and that's the thing. It's okay. You can argue that I'm not maybe getting so much of the sort of spirit character, but in essence, you know, that there is there. You can just about pick out some barley notes, but the complexity is lying here within the sort of like the peat and the wine casks. Okay, a little bit more wininess, a little bit more Cabernet character now on the nose. I'm certainly getting cedar and lead pencil, a little bit more sweetness to the peat as well. Green pepper, again, still there. Red currant jelly. I think I prefer the nose neat, it has to be said. It does kind of lack that slight intensity, and yeah, although the peat is still there with that sort of green peppery kind of element to it, yeah, I think sort of neat is where I'm at with this particular one. Let's see what the tastes like. I'm getting more of that kind of Amarone sweet red fruits now on the palate. Are still pretty coastal, softer on the peat, but it's still a little medicinal. There's a little bit of Cabernet black fruit. I like the complexity of the fruit character that's going on here. It really works well with the peat, and it still retains some of the peat. The peat hasn't kind of all pretty much slunk off. So for me, I think that really worked quite nicely. Yeah. Right, okay, so on to 14.3. So this is simply American oak, ex-bourbon, and second fill wine cask. More peat this time, so almost double the amount of peat. Is that going to give us more peat intensity? It is indeed going to give us more intensity, it has to be said. And this is kind of, I guess, this is the rub, isn't it? It's kind of like, you know, Octomore now needs to be 200 odd parts per million. I mean, 100 parts per million ain't cutting the mustard anymore, it has to be said. That's Octomore. That's peat, herbal peat, hot tar, wet tar, green pepper, medicinal peat, earthy peat, I can almost smell that crumbly peat character as well. There's a little bit of cocoa, there's a little bit of sherry dried fruit, well not sherry dried fruit but winey dried fruits, masquerading as kind of sherry, it has to be said. That's the alcohol being giving it that kind of almost sweet sort of dried fruit character. It's 61.4% for God's sake, so it's going to give you that kind of alcohol sweetness on the nose, which it certainly does. A little bit of marzipan. I can just pick out some barley as well. Standout bottling, it has to be said, and it's not because it's, you know, double the amount of peat of the other two. I mean, I love the other two, it has to be said. You know, I'm a, as you know, a sucker for Octomore, but this really is the standout bottling of the three. It just has a really classical balance, I suppose. You know, I love all the wine cast stuff, don't get me wrong, but this American oak, sherry, big peat, this is just Octomore. This is what Octomore is all about, and it's not overly sherried either. That's the nice thing. Let's see what the pals are. That's a stunning palate. And it doesn't unload all in once. I'm getting the barley start off, the sweetness of the barley. Then we're getting the medicinal peat, a little bit of iodine, some soot, some barbecued meat, tar, creosote, building. It's just building and building and building, and the palate is just going, whoa, what the hell's going on here? That is intense. That is Octomore. That's what I want from Octomore. I want Octomore to leave me in no doubt that I have tasted a heavily, super heavy peated whiskey. But again, it doesn't unload it all at once. It's not just kind of like, you know, whacking me over the head with a sort of like a peat lump hammer. It is kind of unwinding. It does have a lot of peat, but it unwinds, it opens, and that is just absolutely stunning. Really chewy, a little bit of dried fruits coming through as well, dried red fruits. Let's see what the nose gives us now with a little drop of water. It's got a lovely warmth to it now, it has to be said. A little bit more oak, a little bit more oily spirit. Peat has dropped off a shade, but we're still there. I mean, like I said, you know, 200 odd parts per million. It's going to take a bucket full of water to kind of like, you know, get shot of all of that. It's a little sootier, possibly. Yeah, that's Octomore. That is really superb. Let's see what the parts are now. That's really chewy, oily, but it's not compromised the peat again. The peat just starts off and builds throughout the palate. I love the progression. I love the green pepper on the finish. I love the sort of sootiness, the barbecued meat, the astringent coastal notes, the peat, the intensity. Oh, I mean, you know, it's not scary. I mean, it is intense. There's a lot of peat there. You kind of, you know, it's not something you're going to suddenly go, yeah, I'll just try an Octomore. You know, I would say, yeah, build up to it. Do Ardbeg and what have you first, and then go for it. But, damn, that's good. Let's move on to the 15. So this is the first, 15.1. So we're back, dropping down to 108.2 parts per million. So first fill bourbon and recharred bourbon. Let's see what the nose gives on this end, shall we? Very, very oaky. A lot of oak. Creamy, sweet, sort of vanilla and corn and fat corn and vanilla and a bit of peat. Yeah, there's a bit of peat there. There's a bit of dustiness, there's some menthol, a little bit of iodine, some salt. But wow, oak and more oak. Again, it's kind of, ironic, isn't it? Because this should be the bottling that I love. I'm a purist. I love my spirit aged in American oak. I want the spirit character, etc., etc. And yet the two bottlings that are wholly American oak aged really haven't floated my boat, it has to be said. And this goes to show that, you know, I'm flexible, and not everything that's aged in American oak is going to sort of like, you know, do it for me. It has to be said. It's just too much oak going on here. It's just kind of blunting the peat. It's blunting the intensity. I don't get a great deal of coastal notes either. See what the pass on. Okay, a little bit more sooty peat, it has to be said. Nice coastal astringency on the end, because the oak kind of runs out of steam. You know, get that sort of soft vanilla, the toffee, the cream, and then by the time it gets to about the mid palate, it just gives up the ghost and goes, bleh. Yeah, I'm not going to play anymore. And so you get that nice kind of like green pepper astringent sort of peated spirit coming through right on the end, but it's a little bit raw. I mean, I'm not getting the sort of like the Turkish Delight kind of sort of wrong word, young spirit from say 14.1, but there is that rawness there, and it's a little bit bitter as well. The oak is kind of just, again, it's just over oaked in my personal opinion, and it's just kind of like it's not. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it at the end of the day, but the point being is Octomore is expensive. You know, it's 3 figures, and you know, it's if you're going to sort of price a whiskey at that, it's got to sort of be the dog's doodahs. You know, as far as I'm concerned, if I'm going to sell it anyway. And I just don't really sort of like get off on this. It has to be said. Okay, there's a little bit more freshness to the nose now, a little bit more coastal character, but it's still really heavily oaked. Marzipan and citrus, and again the peat just kind of like is almost kind of dissipated. It's not gone as much as sort of like, you know, 14.1, but again there's that kind of slight rose petally note coming through. It's kind of, once you strip out the sort of like the peat and the oak, you're just kind of left with a little bit of young spirit really. And in this instance, again, it doesn't really work. Let's sort of pass on. Again, it's kind of, yeah, okay. It's now kind of softened to an extent that the peat again is still a little bit noticeable, but it's all young spirit and it's kind of oak. It's still very, very oak centric, and it's lacking the wow factor. That's the big problem with both of the ones, is they lack the wow factor. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 15.2. So this is again 108.2 parts per million, second fill wine cask, second fill bourbon, and then re-racked into first fill cognac. Let's see what nose gives on this then, shall we? That cognac cask has had quite a lot of influence. Again, toffee apple, sweet vanilla, a little bit of herbal peat, again peanuts, wood spice, vanilla. It's got a nice freshness to it. There's a nice coastal note there. There's some saltiness, a little bit of smoky peat, but again it's all very kind of nice, and that's not the word that I want to use with Octomore. I want to sort of like say it's going to sort of scream at me and rip my head off and, you know, stuff something down my neck, and it's kind of, it's just a bit polite, it's a bit nice, it's kind of, yeah, and it's not really what I want. Let's see what goes on. that's all kind of back end loaded, it has to be said. I'm getting kind of nice spiciness, but I mean, it has a nice progression. It kicks off again with very much of that cognac character, the sort of baked apple, a little bit of spice. The peat kind of comes through with a little bit of sort of green pepper, a little bit of sort of barbecued meat, not a huge amount, but a little bit. More smoky peat, I suppose. It's a bit masked, obviously, and again, it's pleasant. It's nice, and these are not descriptors that I should be using with Octomore. It's got some intensity, and I suppose if you looked at it in a kind of a vacuum to a certain extent and just judged it on sort of what it is, you would say that bottling is quite a nice peated whiskey. It's got sort of some interesting sort of like cognac-y notes. It's got complexity. But, you know, you can't escape the fact that this is supposed to be Octomore, and this is supposed to be basically roaring, and it isn't. It's kind of meowing, I guess. Again, the peat dissipates with water. I get cereal and barley and biscuity cereal, and it's kind of, yeah, right, okay, I can see that I'm getting spirit character now. Nothing wrong with that. But again, it's just kind of, it's not screaming Octomore at me. It's youthful, and there's a little soapiness there as well. So it's kind of really kind of not putting me off, but it's kind of, you know, when I'm looking at these as a sort of like, and let's be honest, I mean, because they're expensive, when I've got my buying hat on, you know, I have to be selective. I can't have all of them. I can't sort of like, you know, tie up that much amount of money in stock, and you know, I have to basically go with what I really want to sell and what I really want to get behind at the end of the day. And this bottling, although interesting, isn't there. Let's see what the parts are. Nicely salty, coastal. First time we get some seaweedy kind of notes coming through. Again, that cognac-y, apple-y kind of character is very much front and centre. Sweet barley, again less peat. The peat just really does seem to kind of drop off quite substantially when you put a little drop of water, even though it's 108 parts per million. But obviously, as we know, it's only about 50 parts in the finished spirit. But in saying that, I'm just surprised at how the peat kind of drops off quite so intensely, it has to be said. And again, it's kind of all nice, and it's a pleasant spirit. And Octomore shouldn't be nice and pleasant. It should be kind of taking you up a dark alley and yeah. Right, okay, so final whiskey of the afternoon is the Peat Behemoth. It is 307.2 parts per million. If this doesn't smell of peat, nothing is going to smell of peat. Oh, it smells of peat. So, Bourbon and Oloroso, classic, absolute classic. I mean, it is intensely phenolic. I mean, it is earthy peat, herbal peat, sweet barley, medicinal peat, green pepper. Oh, it's got an intense coastal citric freshness. I mean, this is intense. This is Octomore. This is what Octomore is all about. I mean, when you big something up as the beast and all this kind of stuff, it really needs to deliver. And my God, this delivers. I mean, there's some lovely toasty oak coming through. There's a little bit of, I mean, I can still pick out some barley, some spirit character. I mean, 300 and something odd parts per million. Well, 307. Wow, stunning. I mean, this is just this is Octomore in a nutshell. And you know, forget the 108 parts per million. I mean, that's passé. 300 parts per million. This is where we're at. This is Octomore. This is basically what it should be doing. It should be basically pushing the boundaries and Yeah, going where no man has gone before, as they say. Wow, I got a Star Trek quote in. That's impressive. Sorry. Oh my God, that's incredible. I mean, that is stunning. I mean, that is just kind of kicks off with a big wave of intense sherry character and then big peat, earth, tar, coastal notes, salt, green pepper, barbecued meat, and then tannins and alcohol, and oh my God, this is what I want. You know, it's kind of rapturous. It's almost orgasmic, and that's what Octomore should be about. It just should be about the intensity, and it should leave you in absolutely no doubt that you have tasted a super heavy peated spirit. Let's put a little drop of water with it. It's still quite peated. Herbal, seaweed, earthiness, manure. It's probably got more complex within the kind of peat characteristics, I guess, once you put a little drop of water with it. And certainly I'm getting more nuanced peat notes. And that is what I want from Octomore. That is what Octomore is all about, the nuance of the peat. So how's that? That's still peaty, it's chewy, it's malty, it's meaty, it's intense, it's Octomore. That is what I want. That says Octomore, and it encapsulates everything that I expect of it. And yeah, nothing else to say really at the end of the day. Right, okay, so let's sum this peat fest up. So again, a big thank you to Sarah at Remy Contro for the samples for today's episode of the show. Very much appreciated. I hope I haven't bored you too much and gone on. But anyway, like I say, let's sum today's episode of the show. 14.1. It just kind of like didn't have it for me at the end of the day. It was kind of yeah, it was just didn't sort of like say Octomore there, and it was kind of a little bit young. You put a little drop of water with it and the peat just dissipated, and it's a bit of oak, and it's kind of like it's not really speaking to me, it has to be said. I did like 14.2. I liked the interaction between the peat and the wine casks. I thought that worked really nicely. A little bit of water seemed to bring out maybe a little bit more of the Amarone. Certainly neat, and on the nose it certainly had sort of like maybe a little bit more of the Cabernet, and that was, I think that's where that kind of particular bottling kind of won. It was a sort of the complexity of the wininess intermingled with the peat, and there was a little element of the spirit, but it was more about the peat and the wine cask, it has to be said, at the end of the day. And but I suppose kind of 14.3 kind of won it because it had the intensity, the simplicity, the classic characteristics of what I would expect from Octomore, and maybe it was basically more parts per million at the end of the day. The previous two were a little bit polite and nice and that, but 3 was just interesting. 15.1 was just kind of too much American oak at the end of the day, and you know, I often go on about too much oak character, whether it's sherry or American oak, doesn't really matter. Sometimes, you know, that oak character just kind of ends up blunting the spirit a little bit too much. Number 2, I mean, yeah, okay, again, I mean, it was the same parts per million, 108.2% parts per million. It had a nice complexity, it was nice. Again, I mean, you know, I shouldn't be using the word nice when you talk about Octomore. I should be talking about sort of intensity and all that kind of stuff. And 15.3 just delivered without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, you know, if, you know, Octomore is has kind of built itself up on the intensity of Peat character and the fact that it is kind of a one-of-a-kind kind of spirit. And 15.3 just absolutely encapsulated it. It screamed Octomore. And it's not just about the fact that it was 300 parts per million. Yes, I know that the others weren't, but yeah, is that skewing things? I don't know. Is that it just sort of set aside against the other three, or the other two within the 15 range? It just kind of like blew them away completely. And this is where Octomore should be. It should be about screaming at you, but with complexity, and it had complexity. I mean, you know, you can't argue with the fact that that bottling had a lovely complexity, and it was simplistic as well. It was American oak and sherry, and there you go. You know, sometimes the classic recipes, the classic approach just works. Yeah, it doesn't need all the fanciness and all the kind of frippery and kind of stuff like that. Sometimes you just need to be kind of simplistic, American oak, bit of sherry, big peat, and job done, as they say. Anyway, I'm going to have to go and lie down because alcohol is coursing through me, it has to be said. Peat and alcohol, wow, before lunch on Sunday. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the show. I would urge you, as always, to sort of buy a bottle of whatever that seems to take your fancy, try it out. But no, 15.3, good dramming, good afternoon.